In these exercises, you're abbreviating English sentences into half ordinary language, half symbolic sentences. The basis for the abbreviations are the basic components of truth functional logic, complete sentences, and truth functional operators. So these kinds of exercises get you used to easily and confidently identifying those basic components, which is going to be really helpful when we get to full symbolization, which is next. So let's take a look at this first one here. The first thing to do is actually just to break the passage down into premises and conclusions. This helps primarily because it just makes the structure of the logic a little bit easier, a little bit more obvious, but it can also help you see more clearly where the logical connectives are and what they are. You won't, for example, get confused and maybe think that that conclusion indicator word is a logical operator, or maybe in another case that some premise indicator word is an operator. The next step, identify the logical connectives. Once those are identified, you'll just leave the logical connectives as is. So then finally, you start looking for component sentences and you start looking for patterns. You look for where a component sentence might be repeated within the argument. For example, Aristo is home. That is repeated down here. And so we will abbreviate that sentence with an obvious abbreviation. And we'll move on. It is night. Here's another component sentence. It shows up down here too. And so we go ahead and abbreviate that with an obvious abbreviation. Then we repeat the process again. We look for a component sentence. We look to see if it's repeated anywhere. It is. And we uniformly replace those with an obvious abbreviation. And finally, the last component sentence and we replace this with its obvious abbreviation. This argument's a little bit more complex, but the process actually stays the same. So the first thing to do is to, again, just identify the premises, separate them out, make sure that you can identify the conclusion. And here, it's especially helpful because this argument just is longer, and breaking it out this way helps us see what's going on. But also, we have in this premise something that looks like a logical operator and is a logical operator. It's the conjunction. But actually reading in context, that and there plays the role of a premise indicator. Right? It's really just saying it is fall, furthermore the temperature is cold. And in that sense, breaking the argument apart like this just simplifies your job. You don't actually need that as a logical operator there. Then the next step is to identify and locate the logical operators. There's one. Here we see a very long sentence, but the structure becomes a little bit easier to deal with if we key in on the connectives. It's an if-then sentence, and the consequent is a negation of a conjunction. If the general mood is romantic, then all of this, and what all of that is it's not the case that both the temperature is cold and the weather is dry. This premise doesn't have any logical operators, Neither does this one. We've got a conditional here. And our conclusion doesn't have any logical operators. Once we're done with the logical operators, then it's time to look for component sentences and to look for where they're repeating. It is fall, repeats here. So we choose an obvious abbreviation. And get that sentence taken care of. The general mood is romantic. That's another component sentence. We find where that gets repeated. And so then we replace again with an abbreviation. Next component sentence, the temperature is cold. And that occurs down there. And we find an obvious abbreviation for that sentence. The weather's dry. We look for the pattern and abbreviate uniformly. And the last component sentence, it is time for action. It is time for action. And we find an obvious abbreviation for that sentence.